Excel is a really useful tool for creation of tables and for performing simple math functions. It's going to be required for your lab reports in Chem 1B, both for making tables and for actually doing math calculations. So we'll start you off using Excel to make Chem 1A lab reports. As with any app as powerful as Excel, there's a learning curve, so we'll take it slowly, one step at a time. The short video is going to be most useful for those who haven't used Excel before. I'll show you some of the tools you need to create lab report tables, including simple data entry, designating the way numerical input displays in your table, and some formatting features like changing column widths, adding grid lines, and shading. The example I'll use is creation of the data portion of the table you'll need to write your report for the measurement and density lab. So let's start with a quick tour of the Excel app and the worksheet. Now I keep Excel app down here in my tray. Yours may be in a different location, but click on that to start. When Excel first opens, this is the screen that you should see. I want to create a brand new worksheet, so I'll go ahead and click on Blank Workbook. So this is what you'll see with Excel very nicely laid out in grid lines already, which makes it super convenient for making a table. Now I'm going to want to zoom out a little or in a little bit so you can see better. So I'm going to go ahead and expand, use this ruler at the bottom. I can zoom out or zoom in. So I'll zoom in a bit so you can see this better on my screen. The great thing about Excel, because it's already laid out in a table, programs like Word, table making is a little bit more complicated. So we're going to use the pre-laid out version of Excel here with the columns designated by letters and rows by numbers. Now we want to type our data labels in column A, and then I have 3 trials worth of data, so I'll put those in trials B, C, and D. So let's start with the first entry here in the first grid. This is going to be part 1, density of a metal cylinder. So I'll go ahead and type that in. Now when you're finished entering, you can hit enter. That will take you to the cell below, or if you'd like, you can just click out of the cell and that will get you out of that cell and into any one you want to type in next. The next part will have mass data here, so I'm going to type in mass data. And then my first data set will be the mass of the metal cylinder. I'll type that in. And we'll find it more convenient to put the units in the label itself rather than to put them attached to the numbers. So I'll go ahead and type G for grams here. And then the next entry would be the average mass of the metal cylinder. Now I'm going to go ahead and make a mistake here on purpose, but one thing you'll notice when I type in any cell, that what I'm typing appears here in the formula bar. So I'm going to go ahead and purposely leave out the units and then come back and show you how to edit a cell. Now if I were to go back in and just try to type the G that goes at the end of this line, what you would find is the whole thing would go away. Not what I want. So if you find yourself in that predicament, you can just come up here and click on the undo, take you back where you were. Now, since I want to edit the contents of the cell, I come up here to the formula line, and now I can insert or change anything that's already there, and that will get accomplished. Well, here's where we get our first formatting issue. You'll notice that all of my entries are well beyond the edge of column A. So I want to expand the width of column A. So I'll click on the letter A here, and when I go to the edge of that column and hold down my mouse button, the cursor changes to a left-right arrow. And while holding down the mouse button, I'm going to slide that out to the right and then release the mouse button. And that gets me a new column width. Now we're going to actually enter our data. So I'll label my trials. And now we'll put in our first data set. So my first point is 23.4582, And again, because I put the grams here already, I don't need to enter any units. The next one is 23.4584. And the last one will be 23.4580. Now notice that I went ahead and typed in the trailing zero. And this is where you'll run into another default issue with Excel. Like your calculator and many other numerical programs, Excel is going to assume that you really didn't mean to put that trailing zero in, and it will take it away. So we're going to have to change that by telling that Excel that this number needs to have 4 decimal places. Do that, we'll go back and click on that cell, come up here to the Home menu choice, and then slide over here to the number area. Now by default, Excel presumes no formatting, just this general format. So I'll click on number. Excel is going to assume only 2 decimal places with a number, so I'll need to change that. So now I can come here and click on increase decimal. I'll click twice to get my 4 decimal places. And if I wanted to reduce, of course, I could use this one, but that gets me to my 4 decimal places. You don't need to do that with just each cell individually. If I know that all of these cells will need 4 decimal places, then I can click on the first cell and while holding the mouse button down, slide across to select all of these cells, come back to Home, Number, and then to 4 decimal places. All right, so I'm going to stop here and for just a brief pause, fill in the rest of the table, and then we'll come back and show some formatting things. All right, so now I've filled in a little bit more of my table, and notice that many of my entries in column A now really are much too wide. So I'll go up here and do the same thing, click on the A, slide over to catch all of my entries, and that'll clean up my table nicely. Now, the last thing that we'll talk about is how to format the appearance of the table. One of the things you'll notice with Excel is you see these very faint green grid lines, which would be borders around each of the cell. But if you print out your table, you won't actually see those in the printout. So for printing purposes, you'll need to actually add the grid lines. So what we're going to do is select all of this. Again, click on one of the cells, hold the mouse button down and slide to the last selection. Release, come up to Home, and in the font area, you'll find many tools for changing appearance like bolding, italics, underlining, changing cell fill colors, changing font colors, changing font size, changing the font itself. But one of the things here also is borders. Now I'll click on this little window pane drop down. I want to add all borders around these particular cells, so I'll click on that. And now you can see that the black borders have appeared. Now this particular one being a header, I'm going to select all of these, but rather than put in all of the borders, now I just want one border around the outside. So I'll just click on outside borders. The last thing we'll talk about is shading. Now these particular cells, I want no entry. You'll notice that the template that I've put on Canvas, it's in the module area. The module down at the bottom called Lab Resources, you'll find a template for this actual table. Many of the cells are shaded, so we'll come up here, select those 3 cells at the top right, click on Home, slide over to this little paint can, we'll gray out those cells. For an average, since I only need one data entry, I'll go ahead and make grayed out boxes next to those. So again, click on the paint can, click on gray. The last thing that's useful is changing the appearance of a font. If I want to use a bold font, I can come up here to Home, apply that, and that will create a bold for that particular font. One last thing you'll need to do is to print. You can do that from the File menu, select File, slide down to Print. You'll notice out here to the right is how my printout will actually appear, so I can tell before I waste the paper whether or not the table looks like I want it to. And when I'm satisfied, if I have my table connect or my Excel connected and computer connected to a printer, and go ahead and print. So that's it. We'll come back and add a little bit more later in later videos as our needs increase for additional utility in Excel.